Alright y'all, so I am at my brother and sister-in-law's house once again in their nice garage with a truck, and have a maintenance project ahead of me today. So I am going to be doing some suspension upgrades. I've got some really nice OEM goodies here. So I'm going to get into the parts overview and then show you sort of what I'm going to be doing today, and then we'll get into the actual project. Everything here is brand new and OEM, and if you know me or watch my other videos, you know that I am a stickler for OEM parts. So I'm going with a stock upgrade. My truck is not lifted, so I don't need any sort of extra travel or anything with, like, you know, JBA, upper control arms, anything like that. So all new OEM goodies. I've also got new OEM outer tie rods, as well as sway bar end links. So sway bar end links, that was more just of like, while I'm doing all this stuff, I might as well replace those. Outer tie rods, I did notice that one of the tie rods on the truck isn't OEM. So again, just figured while I'm doing this, might as well replace those. For the control arms, so I don't really need to be replacing these fully. The truck isn't really having any major symptoms of, poor suspension or handling or anything, but I have noticed that the bushings on the lowers and the uppers look pretty worn and pretty loose in there. So the reason I'm doing entire new assemblies instead of just replacing the bushings is I found that the parts ordering that I do is through Toyota directly, and I always wait for the 25% off sales. So what I found was the cost to just replace the bushings themselves on everything was really only marginally cheaper than buying the entire assembly itself. So I just figured I might as well just get the whole thing. I don't have to fuss around with, going through all the work to replace the bushing itself, because that's a whole, project in and of itself to replace those. So I just figured this would be the best case, and I can always try to sell those, on Facebook Marketplace or something like that and get some money back. So all new stuff. I've got new hardware for the uppers here. My ball joints are all fairly fresh, so I'm not going to be doing any ball joints. Same with the, shock absorbers, the coils, those are all fairly fresh. So this is all I'm doing, but it's going to require quite a bit of work. So I know that there are several videos out there of people doing this on, first Gen Tacomas, third Gen PreRunners, but just figured I would film my process. I'll show all the torque specs, all that stuff. So as I'm going through it, I'll make sure that you all have the information that you need if you're going to do this project yourself. Now, on top of that, like I said, I am not at my house. I am at my brother's garage here. And again, that's mainly because it's just really nice and smooth, and it's easy for me to get the truck in the air and just roll around and everything, have a lot of space. But that also means that I don't have any of my tools over here. So I always have to bring over this insane array of stuff and get it all, laid out nicely here. And my motto with this is always, bring more than I think that I'll need, just so I don't have to be driving back and forth to do that. So you can see I've got pretty much everything laid out here. I also printed out copies of, they have the actual, factory service manual here. It's got all the torque specs, but just to make it a little easier for quick reference, I just scanned several of the pages that I know that I'll need and just included those on the side here. So I'll have them, but got all the tools so I can get ready to get this jacked up, get it in the air, get the front tires off, and then we'll get started. I'm actually going to pull the skid plates off first. That's just going to make it easier for me to do everything underneath there. So before I get it jacked, I'm just going to zip those off, and there's just a bunch of 12mm bolts for that. Wheels are off, so now I'm just going to go over my plan of attack here. So what would probably be somewhat sensible is for me to just remove the steering knuckle assembly entirely, because I'm going to be doing the lowers and the uppers. However, I don't really feel like, since I have manual locking hubs, it's kind of a pain in the butt to take everything out so that I can disconnect the CV axle in the front and do all that. So I really don't feel like fussing with that. So I think I'm just going to do this in steps, so that at least at any point during this project, the knuckle will be either connected to the lower control arm or the upper. So I think it's going to be easier for me to just start with the uppers. So I've got these sort of mud flaps, or, guards, splash guards here that I have to pop off. And then all we really need to do for the uppers is remove this ABS bolt here. I think that's a 10mm. We need to remove the upper ball joint, so that'll be pretty easy. I have a front end ball joint kit to pop that off. And then we just have this long bolt that goes through the rear of the upper control arm behind the shock mount there. Now we should be able to loosen that long bolt down below here, but in order to fish it out, we're likely going to have to go through the top somewhere. So it's kind of hard to see, but right down in there, if I can focus on that, that's the end of that bolt. So we'll have to see how it comes out. This is on the passenger side here. And then on the driver's side, we will probably have to move this loom, this wiring loom for the battery. So there is a small bolt just right behind, let's see if I can focus on it, right here, that holds this loom to the body of the truck. So if I pull that out, I should be able to move this loom out of the way enough to be able to fish that long bolt out this way. I've pretty much accepted that all of these clips are likely going to break when I pull them out. Actually, those two popped out, but also these mats are just really old and brittle and kind of tearing already as well. So I might end up just replacing this whole setup eventually, get new clips, get new mats. I know they sell some cheaper aftermarket ones. I'll see how much the OEM ones are, but just gonna pop these out. Not worried too much about salvaging them though. Okay, cool. So that gives us quite a bit more access to those long bolts there, which will be helpful. And that's just one 10mm bolt for the ABS bracket here. And now we can pull out the cotter pin on the upper ball joint nut. And then we can zip that out, and that's a 22mm bolt, I believe. Okay, I said it was 22mm. I don't actually know what the OEM size is, I'm realizing, because for whatever reason on the other side it was a 22mm, but this appears to be maybe like a 19. So I guess you'll have to see what you have. I don't know why that's the case for this, because these are both OEM ball joints. All right, so this one is a 19. And again, I like to use these swivel impact sockets. They're really helpful for getting into tighter spaces like this. And now I'm just gonna leave this partially on because I'm gonna use the ball joint separator to pop this out, but I don't want the whole thing to drop just yet. So I'm gonna leave this mostly on there just so it doesn't drop all the way out. All right, that was about as violent as I expected it to be. Upper ball joint is disconnected. I've just got the knuckle tied to the coil spring there with some twine, and I also have a jack stand just supporting the knuckle a little bit just so it's not flopping around on that ABS wire. But now I'm going to go for that long bolt in the rear there. So I've got a 19mm on one end over here, and then we've got another 19mm just in case it decides it wants to spin or something. I've just got a flat wrench braced against the frame there, so that should prevent that nut from spinning with the bolt. So we'll see how easily this pops out. And this is the passenger side, so we'll have to see how much access we get once we get this broken free. Okay, actually, I just realized I should have this flipped. I don't know why I was thinking that would be smart. So I'm going to put the wrench on this side, and then I'll put my my ratcheting wrench on the nut side. All right, hopefully you can see this pretty well, but that bolt just barely fits past the body there. Actually, I'm seeing that the flange on the head of the bolt might not pass, so I'm gonna have to see how I can get that out. I might have to wrangle it a little bit with with something I can lever it with. Okay, so it looks like I can actually kind of pull on the body a little bit, and that bends it out of the way just enough to get that flange of that bolt past that. So I should be able to pull it out now. I'll maybe go up top to see if I can pull that straight through. Okay, we've got another obstacle here. So we got it past the body, but there's now, if you can see there is a AC line that's blocking it the rest of the way. So there is a small bracket. It's kind of hard to see, but there's a small bracket right there on this AC line. So that looks like it's probably a 10mm bolt right there. So I'm going to remove that, see if I can just wiggle that AC line out of the way for a second, just to pull the rest of the way out. All right, that AC line bracket bolt was actually pretty annoying to get off. There's not really a great way to get a socket in there, nor is there a ton of room to get the, butt end of a ratcheting wrench on there. But I got it out, it's just a 10 millimeter, but that should work because you can see now quite a bit of flexibility with this line. So let's see if I can just kind of spread it out enough to get that bolt to get past the apex there without damaging this line. All right, naturally, with nothing ever going easy for me, it looks like whatever this bracket is now also getting in the way. That actually might be, I don't know what that is. There's a chance that it's for my windshield washer fluid level, but it's probably something more important than that. But that little harness is now getting in the way, so I might have to finagle it a little bit to see if I can unscrew that. It looks like it's also mounted into the body of the truck with a couple of bolts, so let's see what we can do. That seemed to do the trick. I don't really know what this is. It's kind of interesting because it's a wiring harness, but it terminates just at this little like block thing. So that did actually fully unbolt with just two 10 millimeter nuts, and now you can see we can get that bolt back out. So I'm not going to pull it all the way out because I don't want the control arm to come crashing down, but you take off the AC bracket and whatever that is, maybe ABS or something as well, but that gives you enough clearance on the passenger side to get that long bolt out of there. Passenger side upper control arm is out along with the bolt. So now again, we've just got to fish out this wiring harness bracket here, just with a single 10 millimeter bolt, it looks like. And then we'll work on getting that driver's side upper control arm bolt out as well. I also just have to say, I love these long flex head, sort of double-ended ratcheting wrenches. It just really gives you incredible leverage for tight spaces like this. Something that you wouldn't be able to do with a normal, combination ratcheting wrench. So can't recommend these enough. There's a bunch of brands that make them. This one's a gear wrench though. All right, so we got that nut and washer off, and now hopefully we can slide that long bolt out a little bit easier than that other side. Let's see if removing that one wiring loom bracket was enough to allow us to get this out. All right, and looks like definitely yes, so that's good. So all you have to do on that one is, again, just remove this one bracket, and that bolt comes out nicely. So we'll pull that out, and we'll pull the control arm out, and then we'll get going quick on getting the new ones back in. So naturally, I spoke too soon, and we have another obstruction here. This is beneath the battery now. We have another one of these little harness, terminus points. I have no idea what this is, but once again, the flange of that bolt head is hitting that. So it looks like there's another 10 millimeter bolt holding this bracket in. You can see right in the top of that, area there. So pull that one out, and hopefully that'll be the last one. Okay, there's actually a second bolt. I didn't see that one. So I'll have to get that one too. It's just a little bit above the other one. Oh, it's in a tough spot. Let's see if I can get the ratchet on there. You can just see that these are just little 10 millimeter bolts. Now that should hopefully move. Yes, and this should come out, no problem now. Oh my gosh, you gotta be kidding me. I'm now hitting the coolant reservoir a little bit. Well, actually, all right, there we go. All right, so there's our big long bolt again. So a little bit of fighting, but got it done. Here's our comparison, the old ones versus the new ones. And the old ones aren't in horrendous shape. There's obviously some dry rot. I stuck a screwdriver in there and was wiggling them around. They're not horrendously loose. I think the uppers tend to get a little bit less wear than the lowers, but you can see, there's still clearly some dry rot, and regardless, they're almost 25-year-old bushings. So the new ones are obviously, super fresh, brand new rubber. So no matter what, that'll just be good to have it in there. And I'm glad I have the new hardware as well. So we'll get these new ones popped in, work on fishing the long bolts in, and we'll get that tightened up. kind of set that into place so I can go up top. Okay, got it started through the slot in the body. Also, just a note with the washer, just have to make sure that the side with the divot goes on the nut or the bolt head respectively. So that's how you want it to sit. The side that goes outwards goes towards the rubber on the bushing. Okay, cool. So now I'm through to the other side, which is good. Now it's pretty much fully aligned and I just have to fish it past that AC line again, which since we still have that unbolted, should go pretty smooth, which it did. And now I have to pull that body panel back a tiny bit right here. And there we go. So that actually was a lot easier than taking it out, funny enough. Wanted to show you all a quick section from the factory service manual because this is something you'll have to keep in mind anytime you're doing suspension work on your truck. There are a lot of components that aren't supposed to be torqued until you have the weight of the vehicle back on the suspension system. So I had a hunch this was going to be the case, but again, we just reinstalled that long bolt and you can see here, hint, at the time of installation, after stabilizing the suspension, torque the nut. So that means that we don't want to torque that long bolt until we have everything back together and back on the ground. That just helps with the preloading of everything and make sure you're not tightening it down before the system has that preload in there. So we'll get it nice and snug for now. Obviously, we want to make sure it's secure before putting the whole weight of the truck back on it, but we won't fully tighten it down to the 87 foot-pounds until we get everything loaded back up. Both of the new upper control arms are back in. I've got the bolts through. I tightened that up. It's probably about halfway to the actual torque spec, whatever it's going to be. So just kind of snugged up. I put the upper ball joint back through the new control arm, put the ABS bracket back on both sides, and now I need to torque this. We can torque the upper ball joint before weighting the suspension system. That's not going to be affected. So we're going to torque each of these to 80 foot-pounds, and then we have to remember to reinsert a brand new cotter pin through there to make sure that that nut doesn't back off unexpectedly. Also, if you're going to be doing your own suspension work or just any sort of work on your truck, I recommend just picking up a kit like this. You can get them at Harbor Freight. And just has every size you'll ever need of cotter pins. So if you're constantly taking these bolts on and off, you'll know that you'll go through a lot of these quick, and you should always use a brand new one. We're about ready here to get started on taking off the lower control arm. So there's quite a bit more involvement in that just because of the way that the cam bolts that you adjust your alignment with, the way that they go into the frame of the truck, the steering rack is going to be in the way. So there's a number of things we need to remove. We need to do things like disconnect the outer tie rods, disconnect the sway bar end links. So we have to disconnect, our end links here, outer tie rod. We also are then going to need to disconnect the sway bar from the brackets underneath and disconnect all of the bolts for the power steering rack. So we're not going to actually fully remove the power steering rack, even though that's what the manual tells us to do. We should be able to finagle it out of the way so that we can get to our cam bolts in there on the lower control arm. So I'll get started on that and I'll show you a little bit underneath of where those locations are. I will start with the sway bar end links. They're 17 millimeters. Because I'm replacing them, I'm going to take off both of these nuts. Do our outer tie rod now. So we'll pull out that cotter pin first. We've got a 22 millimeter swivel socket. Pull that off. Now we're going to use another tool from our front end service kit. It's just another style of ball joint puller. You want to make sure that you're careful not to tear the boot. So you want it to go under the arm of the lower ball joint, but not on the boot of the outer tie rod. So that one popped out with less force than I normally have, but we do have that loose now. So I'll get this jack stand out from underneath the lower control arm and then we'll be able to fully remove that. You can pull off the lower shock bolt here now, and that's going to be a 19 millimeter. I'm noticing since I converted my truck to 4-wheel drive, I have more parts in the way now, right? Like I never used to have CV axles here. I never used to have a front diff. And it's funny how much more difficult we can make these projects. There's just much less room for error, much less room to work. All right, so we got that bolt out. Lower ball joints are now on deck. So we've got to, again, remove the cotter pin, remove that nut, and then we'll get another ball joint puller tool on there, pop that out. This is a 24 millimeter nut. Okay, as I'm thinking about this too, there's nothing else holding the lower control arm to the rest of the truck except these cam bolts. So in order to prevent it from possibly swinging down really quickly, I might just put the jack under here just to support it while I pop this ball joint out. Our lower control arms are now free of everything except for the cam bolts themselves. So what we're going to do now is, because these will affect your alignment, and that's how they work, is these little tabs on the sides. This cam plate here is how your alignment is set. So we need to mark that. We need to make marks to reference where we are so that when we put everything back together, we're not crazy out of alignment. We're going to need to go get an alignment after this job no matter what. But we're going to make marks on this just to make sure we know where to reinstall everything before we go get a professional alignment. So I'm going to do that now. There should be, I believe, 4 plates on both sides. So there's a front and a rear on the one arm, front and a rear on the other end of the arm, and then we'll do the same on the other side. I'm also going to put a mark indicating which plate this actually is. So the front side of the passenger plate. This is a tip I got from one of Timmy the Toolman's videos, just making sure that you don't confuse your bolts when you're putting everything back in so that your match marks are surely going back to the spot that they came off of. We got all of our cam bolts marked. I just used yellow for one side and red for the other just so that I know. So now we can get on to loosening or removing the power steering rack hardware. So we have a 22 millimeter nut here, and there's a long bolt that'll come out the other side. We have a 19 millimeter bolt right here. And then we have 2 19 millimeter bolts. We have a bolt here, and then actually a nut rather on top that'll come out that way. So that should be everything we need to release the power steering rack so that we can move it enough to get these cam bolts out. I thought I was going to have to remove the sway bar entirely, but I don't think I need to. So I'm going to leave that intact for now. If we need to pop it out, we will. But we'll get started on loosening these up. It's another example of one that would have been a lot easier. That was a lot easier. I've done this before because I replaced the bushings, but before I had the front diff and the axles in here, you got a lot more space. This bolt on the top took some convincing, but I kind of shifted my body around and put my feet up against this cross member here, and I was able to break it free, but there's no real possible way to get a impact wrench in there. So you're gonna need a long ratchet or a long breaker bar for this. And with this top bolt out, this long bolt now does come out. It just barely clears the front diff, but that does pull out. Just be careful because there is a washer between the cross member and the bushing on the power steering rack right here. I ended up actually totally removing the passenger side lower control arm just because it was way easier to get the cam bolts out. So I just wanted to do it just so I had a feel for how everything came apart. So that one came out easy. You won't have any trouble making that clear the other end of the power steering rack, but this driver's side is really going to be the problematic side. As you can see, that that cam bolt is really right up on the boot for the inner tie rod of the power steering rack. So, you know, there is some flexibility that you have with the boot itself. It does bend a little bit upwards. And the power steering rack, now that we've unbolted it, will have some movement. So I'm going to fuss with it a little bit and see if I can maybe get it to work without having to tape this clamp off for the boot, because it looks slightly irreversible and it is a little bit hard for me to get to the tabs to release that clamp. So I'm going to see if I can do this without that. If not, I'll go ahead and try to pop that off, slide the boot down to give us some more clearance for that bolt. So I'm just getting this loose with a normal wrench. There's not a ton of space in there to do anything else, and I don't have a ratcheting 22 millimeter, but it's coming out easy enough just to get it a little bit loose. Okay, so we have that rear plate off. And now we'll get a better idea of what we're working with here. Okay, not great there. Don't want to tear that boot. All right, so we saw it here. I actually did get that out. I did get that out without removing this boot for the inner tie rod. I didn't do any damage to it. We'll see, because actually, I'm realizing it's going to be a lot harder to get back in because I'm going to have to torque this. So I'm going to need a little bit of extra space to get a socket on that. But I'm at least happy with that for now. So let's see. Maybe I can. Not sure how I'll be able to get that out now, but we'll see what we can do. I just fought with this cam bolt on this side near the rack for well over an hour. I don't know why I just struggled with that so much, but I just could not get the angle right. I have all the bolts out of the steering rack. Everything's loose, and I don't know, couldn't quite figure out the angle. I eventually got it out. It was a mix of actually moving the control arm itself. You can kind of, wiggle it a little bit. Moving that, using a pry bar on the steering rack, using my jack to support the other side of the steering rack. It was just insane. And I also had to, pull that boot off. So of course the clamp that they put on there is one of these kind of irreversible constant tension clamps. So I chewed it up pretty decent. Sorry, I'm trying to focus here. I chewed it up pretty decent, trying to get it off. I don't know if this is going to work again. If it doesn't look like it will, I'll just use a regular C-clamp until I can, or adjustable clamp until I can get another one of these. But it would be so much easier to do this without the steering rack on there. And I actually debated buying a new rack. Mine is okay, but it's just really old. Another point of being four-wheel drive now is, again, the front drive shaft right there and the back end of the front diff are preventing the steering rack from going any higher. So I probably could have done this easily when I was still a true pre-runner, but alas, I got it out. I'm going to take a little rest for a minute here before I work on getting the final new control arms back in. The bump stops that I have to transfer over to the new lower control arms are actually quite large, and I thought I brought a wrench big enough to fit around them, but I didn't. So I am just going to rig these up in this vise here and sort of twist the whole thing to get these out instead. Seems kind of silly that these don't just come with the new control arms, because if I recall, when I looked these up, I think they were something ridiculous, like 40 bucks a piece or something. So kind of dumb that they don't come with the new ones, but we got these on so we can transfer them now to the new control arms. Now there is actually a torque spec for these, something like 18 foot-pounds, but obviously I'm not going to be able to determine that, and nor is it that big of a deal. These obviously don't have any real critical purpose other than to prevent the control arm from hitting the frame or wherever they're going to make contact with. So not too concerned about it. I'm just going to snug them up a little bit using this bench vise again. Here's one last comparison before we move to install the new lower control arm, so you can see everything is nice and shiny. I did clean up the cam bolts a little bit, especially on the portion that goes through the inside of the bushing. I just had a little bit of surface rust, nothing crazy. I know people that live in the Rust Belt can have a real problem with those, oftentimes having to just cut them off inside the bushing themselves because they're just totally seized. So we're all set there. Hopefully I don't fight as much with the side where the steering rack is this time, getting the cam bolt back in on that side, but I'll show you getting that installed now. Okay, I'm kind of dreading this next part because I fought with it so badly on the way out, but hopefully the way in will be easier, who knows? By the grace of God, we got that really difficult cam bolt back in. And then we also got all the other cam bolts back in. So that's the driver's side front. And then the passenger side was far easier in comparison. See, we got those back in. So I think the next step is, I think I do need to torque these. I need to make sure that the truck doesn't need to be weighted before I torque those, but we need to start getting these button backed up so that I can put the power steering rack bolts back in and sort of tidy this thing up. Okay, so I put both of the shock absorber lower bolts back in. Again, we're not torquing those particular ones all the way down yet because we need to load the suspension first, but there's nothing in the manual that says loading the cam bolts before we torque them down, so I am going to get those torqued down. I referenced some other videos too, and it seems like that should be okay. So these ones do get torqued down to 96 foot-pounds. I'm just going to put this wrench on the back just to make sure it's not moving. It doesn't appear that it is moving, but just to be sure that we're not losing that alignment as I'm torquing. We're going to torque our lower ball joint cowsel nut now to 103 foot-pounds, and then we will install a brand new cotter pin as well. This is a 24 millimeter socket. Okay, so this happens more often than not, but if your cotter pin hole is covered by your cowsel nut, you have to torque it to a bit higher of a degree so that you can expose that cotter pin hole. So I'm going to turn up my torque wrench a little bit and then turn it just enough to expose that hole. That should be good. I'm going to torque the power steering rack bolts back on now. So just as a reminder, we have one long bolt here with a nut, and there are two washers on either side of this bushing. So make sure you get both of those washers back. We have one going up, or sorry, yeah, up through here. That's a 19 millimeter, there's a 22 millimeter, and then we have two 19 millimeters here. We have a nut on top and a bolt on the bottom. So we need to torque these down. The first one, the big one, gets torqued down to 141 foot-pounds. Okay, man, that's kind of tough. Kind of tough to get 141 foot-pounds on that. Front diff is a little bit in the way, so I had to use a shorter extension. And yeah, that's just, you need a lot of torque on that, and you don't have great leverage on here, but we got it clicked. Okay, next up we have this middle bolt here, which the head of the bolt is on top, kind of hidden back here. And the torque spec for this is 123 foot-pounds, 19 millimeter. This child is beating me up. All right, last two, also 123 foot-pounds. We're back, it's a new day. Yesterday I finished getting the power steering rack back on. I fought pretty hard with that cam bolt on the driver's side where the rack is actually sort of, you know, in the way of that, but eventually got that through. I just put the stabilizer bar, the sway bar back on. And now what we need to do is, now that we've got the control arm squared away, is I have these new outer tie rods. So I'm going to go ahead and get my old tie rods marked, where I want to do a paint mark just on the thread so that I know about how far to screw in the new tie rod, so that I'm not crazy out of alignment when I go to drive it to the alignment shop. So I will get this aligned, obviously, and they'll make sure everything is square. But for now, we'll mark the threads, make sure that we have this about right, and then we'll get the new OEM ones on there. They come with a nice new castle nut and a nice sturdy pin there, but I actually don't know which ones on my truck were already OEM. And the only reason I say that is if the thread pattern is a little bit different on a non-OEM one, or the overall length, that mark, that paint mark, isn't really going to do me much good. So hopefully it's close enough though, and we can get by with just getting over to the alignment shop. But I'll go ahead and show you getting those marked up. This is the passenger side, so again, you can get an idea of sort of the comparison here. It does actually look like this one is OEM, so that's a good sign. But yeah, as you can see, I did end up paint marking the, I guess this is the inner tie rod, and then there's this nut, which then screws and secures the outer tie rod in place. So the outer tie rod will freely spin into this housing here, but this nut is what tightens it up against that body. So I have everything marked. I'm also going to just take note of how many threads are exposed, just if for whatever reason I need to count the actual threads. That'll give me a better idea of where I'm at. But again, this will just help us make sure that we're roughly in alignment before we go get this done at the alignment shop. You can probably also see that I do have this temporarily back into the lower ball joint. So I have the outer tie rod that I'm going to remove back into the lower ball joint there with the castle nut just hand tight. And we did also, as we noted, we already torqued the power steering rack back to the body of the truck. So the reason we do that is because we have the power steering rack or this arm flopping around. It's going to be a lot harder to get onto this nut to crack it loose. So just to get everything firm and secure, we'll obviously have to pop this back off to remove the actual tie rod once we loosen this nut here. So I didn't quite get that on film just because I was struggling with it a lot, but I did finally get that cracked loose. What I ended up doing was having the crescent wrench on the jam or the lock nut here, and then I had that jammed up against the lower control arm, so that way I actually didn't even need to have my hands on that. And then using the pliers wrench, which I actually really recommend for these. I believe it is it's like a 28 millimeter and a 27 millimeter, something like that, but some, you know, huge wrench size that most people aren't going to have. But these pliers wrenches, you know, a bunch of different brands makes these. Knipex makes the originals. These are Harbor Freight ones, but these are great because the more leverage that you put on them, the tighter they grip the nut. So leaning on these, and then with that crescent wrench up against the control arm, I finally got that cracked loose with all my might. So I will try to film it on the driver's side now. All right, now let me try to snake this somewhere to give me some good leverage here. Let's see if I can just hold it. I mean, might as well try it. Maybe this one won't be as bad. But man, this crescent wrench is really bad. Pretty poor tolerance on it. Yeah, that's not gonna work. So I need to be able to prop this up somehow. Okay. Whew, all right, cracked it loose. All right, great. So now we can get this castle nut back off the ball joint, and then we'll unscrew this out. So you can kind of see what I was worried about here. So this is a non-OEM one, and you can see that the thread goes up further on the shaft than the OEM one. So that'll make this slightly more tricky because obviously the thread count isn't really going to be as relevant, but I still have it paint marked. And then I'm pretty sure we do have an OEM one on the passenger side, so we can always use that for reference, just because we know that when we get these screwed in, they should be about the same on the driver's side and the passenger side. So we'll do our best, but hopefully we can adjust that once we get in alignment as well. We've got these aligned now as best as we can manage to get them, but I think they came out pretty good. And the more important thing is that we have about the same amount of threads exposed on both the driver's side and the passenger side. So we're not going to be really far out of whack either direction. So that's great. I don't know what the torque spec is on those. I don't know how you would possibly get a proper torque on there. I kind of just muscled it as much as I could from the angle that I could get it at. But regardless, now we have to get the new castle nut torqued into place. I'll have to look up the torque spec for that. We have a new cotter pin for both sides as well. And then we're on to our last step, which is going to be getting in our new sway bar end link. So that'll mount up on the new lower control arm and connect up here to the sway bar. So our torque on these outer tie rod castle nuts is 67 foot-pounds. Put our new cotter pin in now. They give you a nice beefy stainless steel cotter pin for this. This is our new sway bar end link. These are side specific. The angle of them is in such a way that it'll only work on one side. Also, one of them has this little sort of built-in washer on the bottom. So that's the one that goes on the bottom that connects to the lower control arm. And the other one on the top will go to the actual sway bar. These are both 17 millimeter nuts, and they do have actually different torque specs. So the top one connected to the sway bar gets torqued to 51 foot-pounds, and the bottom one connected to the lower control arm gets torqued to 66 foot-pounds. Put the tires back on now that we got all the new parts on. Something that I just need to make note of as I drop this down and as I get the lug nuts torqued is, again, we have two major parts that we didn't torque down yet, and that is the upper control arm, the long bolt, and then the lower bolt on the suspension on the shock. So we're going to weight the truck first, and we'll get under there and make sure that we can still access those to torque them down to spec. But I'm going to start dropping everything down, and we'll get everything set up to be finalized before I can go get in alignment. Also, always remember to torque your lug nuts. It only takes a couple minutes, and these are 83 foot-pounds. Okay, cool. It looks like we should have plenty of room, especially with the fender apron still out. We should have plenty of room to torque that upper control arm bolt, so that shouldn't be any problem. And we can easily get the lower shock mount from the side as well. Not a ton of space, but I can do one click at a time. And now lastly, again, we have that lower shock mount here, which needs to be torqued to 101 foot-pounds. Well, that's a wrap on this video. Hopefully you can tell, but our rough alignment came out pretty good. We're already pretty much perfectly in line, so that'll be more than good enough to get us through the next few days until I get it professionally aligned. But yeah, this was a good project. It definitely is a physically demanding one, like any suspension work. It kind of beat me up a little bit, but I think everything came out good. Happy to have some new OEM parts in there. So make sure you're subscribed. I'm going to be putting out a lot of new first gen videos this year, so hopefully it'll keep you guys entertained. But thanks again for watching.